Tuia I runga, tuia I raro, tuia I roto, tuia I waho, tuia I te hari tangata I pai nei, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Te whare etu nei, te whenua I te koto nei, tēnā korua. He mihi nui ki te mana whenua o tēnei rohi, waitaha ka te māmoe kai tahu. Kina mauna whakahi, kina wai tiri nei, kina rangatira huhua, tēnei te mihi, tēnei te mihi. Kina mate o te wā, rātou kuia, whetu rangatia, haere, haere, moi mai rā. Rātou kia rātou, tātou kia tātou. Ahurangi Daryl Schwenke, tēnā koe. He mihi hoki tēnei ko tō whānau me o hoa. I ngā rangatira, I ngā ahurangi, I ngā kaimahi, I ngā tauira, I ngā homahi, I ngā tangata katoa, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. Kia whakakapi ahau ki tēnei kōrero, kia kaha te reo Māori. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Talofa lava, malo lele, Nissan Bulavanaka, kia orana, and warm Pacific greetings. My name is Tony Ballantyne and I'm the Deputy Vice-Chancellor External Engagement for the University, and it's my great pleasure and honour to be the host of this IPL this evening. A very warm welcome to you on what is a fairly cool evening. So welcome to those of you who are here in person, but also greetings to those of you who are online, either live or maybe watching from the future. I think it's very appropriate that these gatherings always begin with a mihi and an acknowledgement in Te Reo Māori, but as I acknowledge, especially in this week, which is Te Wiki or Te Reo Māori, Māori Language Week. In my mihi, I started by acknowledging the bonds that connect us together, and of course we're connected strongly as a university community, acknowledging the location where we're gathered, acknowledging mana whenua, our key treaty partners, of course, those who have passed before us, and then returning to the room, greeting Daryl, greeting our distinguished guests, and all of you gathered here this evening. Daryl, I acknowledge your friends and family, but I think a particular acknowledgement now to your wife Jane and children Zachary, Faith, and Asher. These are special occasions. We are wearing our robes. At the University of Otago, we now wear these very rarely. We wear them at graduations when we come together to celebrate students at the end of their academic journeys, and we wear them at these occasions, inaugural professorial lectures, where we celebrate our colleagues being promoted to the highest rank within the university. So the fact that we're wearing these robes underlines the specialness of the occasion. And these events are special for two reasons. One, they're special because they're an opportunity for us to come together, to listen, to reflect and celebrate the scholarship, the teaching, the service of one of our esteemed colleagues. But they're also very important, they're very special because there are occasions in which we can celebrate the core business of the university. Teaching, research that underpins that teaching, and of course that is as good in its own end, and our leadership, community service work, and our work as members of professions. So these are opportunities for us to really celebrate what the university is about. So it is a fantastic opportunity for us to come together to celebrate the outstanding scholar and colleague that Daryl is, and more broadly, to celebrate the place of knowledge and binding our community together. So it's a special occasion, a special evening, and again, welcome to you all. Kati, enough from me. I am now delighted to hand over to Professor Lisa Matasu-Smith, who will carry on with a formal introduction. So, nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Kia ora, Tony. E ngā mana, e ngā reo, rao rangatira mā, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Lisa Matasu-Smith toko ingoa, ko te tumuaki o te kura, matai rongoa koi ora. Aho. So, welcome everybody, kia ora, talofa, and warm Pacific greetings. It is my honor and pleasure as the dean, or the acting dean of the School of Biomedical Sciences, to formally introduce the professors in their inaugural professorial lectures. And as Tony has so nicely explained, these are incredibly important and special moments for us as academics, but it's also, I think, one of the great joys, not only introducing the IPLs, but listening to our colleagues, not only talk about their amazing research, which we often hear a lot about. We focus on the research outcomes and what people are doing in their teaching, but to actually hear the journey and really understand how it is that our professors have reached this stage. And it's exciting to hear as colleagues. I think it's really important for students as well to hear these stories, particularly our graduate students. And it often seems like it's this magical journey, but it's fascinating. It is magical and fascinating, but also a lot of interesting twists and turns often in the journey to professor. So formally, I can say, Professor Daryl Schwenke is a cardiovascular physiologist with a particular interest in neuroendocrine control of the heart and the vascular system in health and disease. So looking at his academic background, he started his academic career as an undergraduate at Victoria University in Wellington, when he received his BSc honors in 1993. And then came to the University of Otago, finishing his master's in 1995 and his PhD in August of 2002. After undertaking in his PhD, of course, it's nice to see Pat Cragg here, with Pat Cragg in the Department of Physiology. After his PhD, he worked as a junior research fellow for a year in the Department of Orthopedics and Physiology through until 2003, and then he took off for what has become a long-term relationship with researchers in Japan. So he undertook a postdoc and fellowships from 2003 to 2006 at the National Cardiovascular Research Institute in Japan, where he, I assume, was really introduced to using the synchrotron radiation microangiography. So hopefully we're going to hear a bit more about what that is. And started his journey in identifying the physiological significance of what was at that time a newly discovered hormone known as ghrelin, and the impact of that on cardiovascular control. So he maintained those relationships with his colleagues in Japan, and went on 2 further sabbatical visits in 2011 and 2017, and has published numerous papers with his colleagues, both here and in Japan. He returned to Otago as a postdoctoral fellow in 2006 and maintained that role until 2009, when he took up a lectureship in the Department of Physiology, moving quickly to senior lecturer, associate professor, and of course, most recently, professor. So in terms of his research, Daryl's received more than $2 million, including 2 very recent HRC, Health Research Council projects, which he's currently maintaining the research in these 2 areas, with truly fabulous titles. I always love a good title. So one of them is Can Loss of Hunger Hormone Increase Cardiovascular Disease in Pacific Peoples? But the second one is one that I really enjoy. Can Love Break Your Heart? Oxytocin makes the failing heart skip a beat. So it also goes quite nicely, I think, with your title of your IPL. Daryl has published over 70 papers in top international peer-reviewed journals with high impact factor, but he's also undertaken some incredibly important research here in Aotearoa, focusing on health in Pacific, in particular Samoan communities, and looking at the topic of important issues like the use of bodily tissues in research, and how that might be seen differently, in Pacific populations, and the importance of that. So some incredibly important community engaged health research. Outstanding teaching, of course, is a requirement of a new professor, and Daryl has certainly shown that. He's supervised and co-supervised numerous PhD and MSc students and countless honors. So the list of honors and summer students was truly impressive. He's teaching and convening at all levels here at the University of Otago, but also was involved in really facilitating the teaching, the development, the teaching, and first year medicine at the National University of Samoa, taking knowledge from our teaching, first year teaching and so forth here, and really helping out with the development there. In service, again, outstanding service. Daryl was our inaugural Associate Dean Pacific from 2018 through to 2021. And that was really where I got to know him and his work. But that really did start the journey of the school on increasing engagement with Pacific students, Pacific research, and Pacific communities, which is an incredibly important aspect of what we do, and that benefits all of us so greatly. So thank you for that incredible work that you did and really starting that journey that we are now continuing. You moved from that tough role to another one that I'm very thankful for, and that is chairing the University of Otago Animal Ethics Committee, which is a huge job, but again, so incredibly important for the work that we do in the School of Biomedical Sciences. So I will leave it there, but just ask you to join me in welcoming Daryl to give his inaugural professorial lecture on Sympathetic to the Heart of the Pacific, where he's going to be telling us. At first I thought that was a crayfish that you were holding, which shows kind of how anatomically inclined I am, but really looking forward to hearing your lecture. So Daryl, please, or Professor Schwenke, I should say, please.
Talofa lava, malo le soifua I o tuuma. Ua whiwhi o mai I tātau whaafoile, whaafetai I le tātau tamā. I le langi mo lona alofa. Ia manuia le tātau awhiawhi. Whaafetai mo lou, whaafafonga, mai au tautalanga. Wai au. Loi tama o Mac, mai le nui o Alamagato Apia, I le pito nui o Taumasanga, mai le motu o Upolu Samoa. O loi tina o Anne, mai le nui o Hutt Valley, Wellingtoni. E toa whā o uso o Peter ma Jesse ma Wayne ma Tristan. Ua whai lo'u to'olua, o lo'u to'olua o Ingoa o Jane. E toa tolu le ma ua whānau o Zachary ma Faith ma Asher. Wai a'u, wa'u o le Samoa. Wao o se atli'i o le atua. Loi ingoa o Daryl. Very warm greetings to all of you here this evening. I'm truly humbled that you have come to join me as I share the journey that I've been on in this academic trip. In the introductions, I welcomed you, but I also asked the question, who am I? And I guess this is an opportunity to share with you exactly who I am. If you understood what I said in Samoan, you could walk out of here and know exactly what the rest of the talk is going to be about. But for those that didn't quite understand the Samoan language, you get the privilege of sitting through a drawn-out talk. This is a Mack Anthem truck. It has a 13-litre, 500 horsepower motor with a torque of 2,000 pounds per foot. And it has a carrying capacity of 80 tonne. Now you may be thinking, why on earth would you know that, Daryl? And the reason for that is because as a young lad, I had an absolute fascination with trucks. Everything intrigued me about them, the power, how much they could carry. And this sort of became a little bit of an obsession. And then there was this movie called Over the Top. And this was the story of a truck driver traveling across the United States with his son and an opportunity to get to know his son a lot better. And at different towns, he would enter regional arm wrestling competitions until ultimately he moved on to the national champs, and he overcame all odds and he won the national arm wrestling champion. So after seeing this movie, it was fixed in my mind that after high school, I would become a truck driver, immigrate over to Australia first, but then move on to the States, entering regional arm wrestling competitions with the goal of becoming the world champion arm wrestler. Many of you won't be surprised that I didn't become a world champion arm wrestler. In fact, after seeing this movie, I challenged my mother to an arm wrestle and she whipped me. It wasn't a good start. But by the grace of God, something else was planned, and that was for me to become a biomedical researcher. And so in this evening's talk, I'm really just wanting to share the journey through the Pacific, which has taken me originally from the heart of the Pacific to New Zealand, back and forth with Japan, as well as this island off the coast of New Zealand called Australia, but then ultimately back to the heart of the Pacific. So starting at the beginning, I'm of Samoan descent. My father was born and raised in a small village called Alamagato in Apia, Samoa. And so as my identity is in that, that's where my story begins. My father migrated to New Zealand, and after traveling around New Zealand for some time, him with my mother, who is of New Zealand descent, settled in a small suburb of Lower Hutt called Nainai. It was very humble beginnings. We lived in state housing. We were in the lower socio-economic group. But you know, we were happy. For those of you who've noticed, you can see that I have no idea what I'm riding in the front there. That's me at the very bottom. But to my left is a truck. And I'm just wondering if that's where my fascination of trucks began. So although we didn't have much, we had a lot of fun. For those of you who know me, you know I've got a bit of a whacked sense of humour, and I guarantee it came from my father. He was joking all the time. So there was a lot of laughter. One of the strongest things that my parents imparted on me was the importance of work ethic, to work hard at what you do. I have to admit, as a young lad, I didn't embrace that fully until later on in life. But this is where it started. They also said, enjoy every moment. Work hard, but enjoy every moment. So at the front there are my two parents, my mother and father, and they just loved to experience adrenaline rushes. And the one to the left of my mother is my cousin. She was loud. I can just say that. So in the early years, I guess I was a bit of a joker. I did like to play pranks, and I'm not quite sure if I've fully grown out of that, but I loved to have fun, and so therefore when it came to school, I didn't really take school seriously. and a lot of the time I was the class joker, just loving to have fun. For those of you who can't spot me in those two class photos, I always had the same position in every class photo, on the very end. So as Lisa alluded to, I did my undergraduate study in Victoria University and found an interest in, biomedical research. And so the best place to further that, without question, was to move to Otago. Now, of course, Otago is renowned for the beauty of its university, but it was a great surprise to learn that there was so much more to offer here at Otago, with the steepest street in the world, the activities associated with the steepest street in the world, such as the Jaffa Run, the beautiful coast of Otago, this is Tunnel Beach, and the amazing albatross colony. Otago, Dunedin has so much to offer. But it was a wonder that as I came into Dunedin Airport for the very first time in the South Island, the plane was coming into the airport and it was going over farmland, and I thought, wow, Dunedin is really a hick country town. But of course it's because it's so far out of town. I guess one of the proudest things about Otago is the graduates, the students that graduate from Otago University. When you look at them, you can see the potential that they have to change the future. But at the same time, when you look at them, it is amazing to see the antics that they get up to. I think it might have been maybe last year or the year before, I was teaching a paper that had 120 students in it. I turned up to a lecture one morning and there were 3 students that attended the lecture. And it was hard not to take that personally. I thought, am I really that bad? But fortunately, one of the students came down to me at the end and said, Daryl, Dr. Schwenke, please don't take this personally, but the day before was St. Patrick's Day. So most of the students are probably still in bed. So that was a relief to hear that. As you sit there this evening, you're looking at this very straight, hard-nosed academic, very serious professional. But I do need to, I guess, disclose the fact that as a student, I also got up to some antics. And one of those was to disguise myself for all of my student ID photos. I particularly liked 1999, where I had a ring through the nose. And I thought, how am I going to beat that until 2001, where I had big bottle glasses, a chain going from my nose to my ear, and fluff up my nostrils. Word of this got to one of the local newspapers, and this was published in a news article. And so all I can say is thank you, thank you, thank you to the University of Otago for still allowing me to be enrolled. Not only to the University of Otago, but more importantly to Professor Pat Cragg. I say thank you, Pat, and I say sorry for all the pranks that I pulled. It was very difficult to let go of all those pranks. I do have to acknowledge Pat, though. She was the one who taught me the importance of being absolutely meticulous in everything you did. One of the things that really stood out to me, and I'm not embellishing this, but often I would go to Pat and ask a question of, I'm not quite sure who did this. And I'm not sure if you remember, Pat, but you would say, well, if you go to the 3rd floor of the medical library, go to the 5th aisle, and about 10 metres down there will be a book called blah blah. Now, if you go to page 297, you'll find the exact answer to that. It's true. And I was just amazed that she hit the nail on the head every single time. So Pat took me on as her master's and PhD student, and the area that we were particularly interested in was looking at how the breathing of high altitude dwellers is altered in order to adapt to the low oxygen environment with which they live. Unlike all other mammals, or humans, should I say, those that are born and reside at high altitude do not respond to low oxygen by increasing their breathing, which is a fascinating finding. So you would be forgiven for thinking, well, if you want to look at the changes in breathing at high altitude, you need to go and study participants at high altitude. And as great as that sounds, I had far better plans. Rather, I got to work with these little fur balls called guinea pigs. And you may be thinking, why guinea pigs? Well, I didn't know this at the time, but guinea pigs originate from the Andes Mountains of South America. And so they actually possess the very trait that we're interested in studying, that is a poor response or breathing response to hypoxia. So essentially my master's and PhD was trying to understand why, or the mechanisms as to why they have this poor breathing response to hypoxia. By the end of my PhD, I had gained an intriguing appreciation of how the whole body works together, how things that go on in the periphery can communicate with the brain, and how the brain can communicate with the rest of the body. And so I wanted to pursue this as I started to look for endeavours overseas. And in the words of our Prime Minister, Chris Hipkins, it was time to spread my legs and go abroad. And so this is where I then moved over to Japan. I was fortunate enough to gain a JSPS fellowship, which is the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science, which allowed me to travel to Japan for the postdoctoral years. I'd never been to Japan. I don't think I'd really heard much about Japan at all, but I had recently also become married. Yes, someone did decide to marry me. And my wife had done a Bachelor of Arts in Japanese. So it seemed a good idea to look for a potential postdoc in Japan. Turned out to be a real career, a slingshot. So we moved over to Japan. It is an incredibly rich culture. But it's not just a case of observing a culture such as this, but to also experience the culture of Japan. So therefore, where we observe the beauty of the kimono and the beauty of the geisha, we also wore the kimono. Well, I didn't, but the ladies in my family did. Where we learned or observed the samurai, we became the samurai with my geisha on my arm. And where we observed the beauty of Mount Fuji, it was important to experience Mount Fuji as well. So there were all of these cultural experiences which were life-changing. It always impressed upon me the juxtaposition of the old versus the new in a culture like Japan, where they pristinely maintained or preserved the castles of old while building grand towers such as the Sky Tree in Tokyo. The only thing I found difficult about the culture of Japan is the density of the population. With the population of 130 million in a country just over the size of New Zealand, I do sort of suffer from dense populations like this, so I did find it difficult to go amongst cities such as Tokyo and Osaka. And Osaka is where we were ultimately based. But fortunately, in Osaka, there is a mountainous region around the periphery of the main city, and we were located in Mino, which is right on the border of the mountains, and so it was very easy to dart into the mountains. I worked in the neighbouring town called Suita, at the National Cerebral and Cardiovascular Research Centre. This particular place was famous in Japan for being the first hospital to perform the heart transplant. And so therefore it was favoured a lot by the Japanese government for funding. And so it was very easy to do some really staggering science at this centre. Now when you look at this picture, it looks quite glamorous, but just to fully disclose, the blue building here is the hospital, and that little white building out the back there is the research institute, which is where I worked. I was located in the Department of Cardiac Physiology, which was headed by Professor Hidezo Mori. Upon entering this department, they were incredibly welcoming, and I really felt part of the community almost straight away. Within the department itself, there were different research teams, and I was part of a team that was headed by my mentor at the time, Professor Mikiyasu Shiro, or just Miki. And I was also part of the team with both Dr. Hirotsugu Tsuchimochi, or Hiro, and Dr. Pearson, or just James, with which both Hiro and James have since then come to visit our department. Then there was me, Kare, and I was called this quite often, well, a few times. Whenever we had a departmental meeting where there was a guest that was coming, the head of department, who was a little bit quiet, he would often introduce the guest to the rest of us, and he would say something along the lines of, Yokozo, kochira wa Akiyama sensei, Yamazaki sensei, Nishura sensei, Pearson sensei, and Kare. And I thought, oh, I must be so up there that he's just not used to to having someone so elite in the department. I'm that special guest. But of course, part of the fellowship that I went over with gave you Japanese lessons. So as I learnt more and more about what he was saying, what he was actually saying was, well, welcome. This is Dr. Akiyama, this is Dr. Yamazaki, this is Dr. Nishura and Dr. Pearson, and him. I tried not to take that personally. I was told by the others that he didn't really sort of focus on people in his periphery. Then it came to working in the research labs, and there was a certain etiquette that had to be followed working in a lot of the Japanese labs. And one of them was to change your shoes or take off your shoes before you go into the lab and wear some of the in-house slippers. Of course, if you had your own slippers, that was always beneficial. But if you didn't have your own slippers, you had to use the in-house slippers, which was fine for me. I didn't mind that. But over the years, I've taken many postgraduate students to work in Japan, and it becomes a little bit difficult when you take a 6'4" individual to work in Japan where his toes can barely fit in the slippers. He was incredibly tall, and so even working in the lab itself, he often had to sit on a makeshift stool so that he could get his legs under the bench. So he did struggle. So there were certain good practices or research etiquette, lab etiquette that we had to follow. And I think of what would poor research lab etiquette look like. And this diagram, or this picture here, far side, is actually in one of our third year labs. And I look at it and I laugh because I think how outrageous it would be to have food and chemicals in the same room. Not only that, but to have food and chemicals side by side that you could possibly get them mixed up. How ridiculous is that? I laugh, but 15 years ago it was pretty normal. This is a panoramic photo of the lab that I was working in, and to your left is where my desk was. So that's my office. Behind my office, or the desk, is the fridge for food and chemicals. Right beside my desk was the lab bench with which we did our experiments with rodents. In the back is a little cupboard where we housed our animals, and so they were freely accessible to the lab itself. On the bench here, you can see that we've got coffee cups right beside the chemicals. In the fridge, I would often put my soup right beside the beaker of cyanide. So I just had to make sure that I was grabbing the right cup as I was pulling it out of the fridge. Because we did have the animals in the same room, or housed in the same room, we did have a couple of escapees. One of them got behind a cupboard, and it was very difficult to get it. So somebody, I won't name who, came up with the bright idea of using a gaseous anesthetic to put the tube behind the cupboard so it could make the animal go to sleep, and then we could retrieve it. The problem is I don't know who went to sleep first, the animal or myself. So that wasn't such a smart idea. So what is the research that I'm actually interested in? Fundamentally, I'm incredibly interested in, once again, how the brain communicates with the rest of the body, particularly the heart. Essentially, although they're two different organs in two different locations, it's important to understand that they have this beautiful, harmonious relationship in the way that they communicate with each other. And they communicate with each other through this nerve pathway called the sympathetic nervous system. And many of you may be familiar with the sympathetic nervous system based on the fight or flight response. When you're posed or presented with a threat, the initial reaction is to increase your heart rate to make the heart pump stronger so that it can get blood to the working muscles in the event that you need to escape from the threat or fight the threat. And so therefore, the brain and the heart coordinate this overall body response so that you have the best outcome. So these two different organs are working incredibly tightly together. And I would like to call it perhaps a love relationship between the heart and the brain. The problem comes, however, when there is a challenge to the heart, such as that of a heart attack. When there is a heart attack, for example, if you get a blockage of one of your main coronary arteries, the heart becomes damaged and it can't work very effectively. And what it does is it causes a breakdown in the way that the heart and the brain communicate together. And so they essentially start fighting towards each other. And the reason for this is because the heart is damaged and it's struggling to do its job, which is pump blood around the body. And so it's relaying this information back to the brain saying, hey, look, I'm really struggling here to cope with the work that I've got. The brain is telling the heart, well, look, every other part of the body depends on you. So you really need to keep going. And I won't take no as an answer. And so it starts shouting at the heart saying, work, work, work. The problem is the heart can't cope. And so ultimately, it gives up, and that is what we see as sudden heart failure. So a lot of the research that I do is at that time was trying to understand the mechanisms by which the heart and the brain communicate to have this harmonious relationship. But importantly, how we can possibly restore this harmonious relationship following a heart attack. Now, at exactly the same time in a different department, it was the Department of Hypertension, was this professor called Kenji Kanagawa. He ultimately became the director of the entire centre. And he was a renowned researcher for exploratory research. And so what I mean by exploratory research is his passion was trying to discover new hormones, to discover new things about the body. And we had a conversation once, and he said there's pros and cons about this. He said there is nothing more exhilarating than knowing that you have discovered that something that will potentially change the way we do clinical practice. Plus the fame that comes with making a new discovery. far outweighs anything that he could possibly imagine. The problem, however, with exploratory research is you can guarantee that you won't be the only one trying to discover a new hormone. And so hormone discovery can be considered as a race, because lots of people are trying to discover this new hormone, and you could spend years trying to discover a hormone only to find out that somebody else has found it first, which means all of that work has been a waste of time. And so, not long before I arrived at the National Cardiovascular Centre, Kenji Kanagawa and his team discovered this gut hormone called ghrelin. Now, one of the beauties of discovering a new hormone is that you get to name it. And so, Kenji Kanagawa sat down with his team. There was Hosoda, Dr. Hosoda, Dr. Tokudome, and Ellen. And they were sitting there trying to think of the name, what they could call this new hormone. But unfortunately, that morning, Ellen hadn't actually eaten breakfast or any food. And so her stomach was really rumbling. And this was really annoying Kenji, until he finally had had enough. And he said to Ellen, he says, "Why on earth is your tummy going grrr, Ellen?" And that is how we got the name ghrelin. Ghrelin. So ghrelin was discovered as the gut hormone. It stimulates your appetite. It makes you want to eat. So therefore it's been implicated as one of the main hormones that drives satiety. But not only that, it also induces or it modulates how that energy is changed within the body. So you take food in because of ghrelin, but then ghrelin works with that food to create the energy you need to live. Now, I guess one of the conundrums at the time was, this is a hormone that was discovered in the gut, but we are working in a cardiovascular centre. So the obvious question was, well, how can this hormone possibly affect the cardiovascular system? Because it is almost unheard of that a hormone has only one sole effect. So this is where Kanagawa and Mickey collaborated to try and identify some of the roles which ghrelin impacts on the cardiovascular system. And this is where I came into to bring my expertise at looking at this heart-brain communication. We talked about the idea that the heart and the brain, they don't get on after a heart attack because of this breakdown in communication. But what we trialed was to say, well, after a heart attack, if we give the hormone ghrelin, what happens about this relationship between the heart and the brain? And what we found is that ghrelin was able to, I guess, act as a mediator between the brain and the heart and to say, come on, you guys, you both love each other. And so therefore, it didn't activate the sympathetic nerve activity, which meant the heart could actually recover from the insult of a heart attack. And so it was able to be essentially repaired. And in doing so, it restored this loving, harmonious relationship. So we were over the moon about this discovery because it provided a novel therapeutic strategy for pursuing clinical trials. But on top of this, we thought, well, if it has such a profound impact on this type of relationship between the heart and the brain, surely it must have other cardiovascular benefits. We've just shown that it improves the sympathetic control of the heart. So maybe it acts in other cardiovascular diseases such as a lung disease, for example, pulmonary hypertension. Or maybe it also acts on vessels, blood vessels, like our coronary vessels or our peripheral arteries, because these are subject to cardiovascular disease. So the wheel had ultimately gained momentum to start investigating this. But suddenly, everything came to a screeching halt. Just when I thought life couldn't get any better. I thought I was at the pinnacle of my research. Could life really get any better? Guess what? I became a father. It's amazing how your first child can change your perspective of the world. Not long after that came my daughter Faith. She still pokes her tongue at me. And then finally, number 3, Asher. All 3 have had a profound impact on my life and my attitude towards research as well. As much fun as it is having children, I would go to work to relax because these 3 caused utter exhaustion. Thank you, you 3. Now, it was a personal decision that after the birth of my firstborn, as much as I loved working in Japan, I personally didn't want to remain in Japan with my children. And so my wife and I agreed that let's try and move back towards New Zealand to be with family. And so therefore, this triggered the return back to New Zealand. Of course, opportunities are not always abundant. And once again, I'm incredibly thankful to Pat, who offered me a postdoc with her. Thank you so much, Pat. And so I came back to Otago and worked with Pat. And I think the timing was quite good because it wasn't long after that an academic position became available. And so in 2009, I took up a lectureship. Now, I do remember at that time, Pat knew my joking ways, my prankster ways, and she did have a very growing up talk, we'll say. And she said to me, Daryl, you've been a joker, you've been a prankster, but you are entering an academic position. So you need to act like a professional. And I thought, that they are wise words, very wise words. And so the conversation carried on, and then she said to me, oh, by the way, Daryl, whereabouts do you live? So I said to her, well, do you know Northeast Valley? And she said, yeah. And I said, if you go down Northeast Valley all the way to the end, you come to a fork where if you go straight ahead, you go to Bethune's Gully. If you go right, it goes up around Mount Cargill. And she went, oh, yeah, yep. And I said, well, if you go about 100 metres, there's a street on your right, and on the corner there's a house there. She goes, oh, yeah. And I said, not even close to there. I'm over in Waldronville. And she goes, now this is what I'm talking about, Daryl. Thanks, Pat. Some things die hard. But once I was back in this academic position and with Pat, it was an opportunity to reignite this journey of understanding the benefits of this hormone ghrelin on the cardiovascular system. Now, one of the ways in which we can assess the health or integrity of your blood vessels is by way of angiography or angiograms. Many of you may be familiar with X-rays, where you get a picture of your broken arm. X-rays can also be used to look at the integrity of your blood vessels. If you inject a contrast agent into the blood vessels, they become illuminated, and you can see with precision how the health of those blood vessels is. And this is a common technique used in the hospital for assessing the coronary or heart vessels of those that have had a heart attack or myocardial infarction. So what they do is they put the patient on the table, and they have this X-ray that is in close proximity to your chest to look at the coronary vessels. Now, full disclosure, most of my research uses a preclinical or an animal model, and most of those animal models are rodents. And so therefore, if we were to utilize a piece of equipment such as this, we simply wouldn't have the power or resolution to be able to visualize these blood vessels. It would be impossible. So essentially we need something with a bit more grunt, a bit more power that can actually visualize with the same sort of resolution the blood vessels in a rodent heart as we can see in the human heart. And so therefore we needed to use this thing called synchrotron radiation microangiography. And this is the reason why even since my return back to New Zealand I've had ongoing collaborations with those in Japan, is because the synchrotron facility is located in Japan. But on top of that, Australia have also developed a synchrotron facility. And so now we also have the opportunity to start utilising the Australian synchrotron. A lot of the work that I've been doing at the Spring 8 facility has been in collaboration with Dr. Pearson, but also my HOD, Rajesh Katari. And we've spent a lot of time at these facilities. So as you can appreciate, at least with the one in Japan and even the one in Australia, these are massive facilities which generate synchrotron radiation. Now you'll be asking the question, what is synchrotron angiography? And it's a very, very technical answer, so I'll do my best to try and explain it. What it is a really, 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 really big X-ray machine. That's about as best as I can do without completely boring you. But essentially what it means is that we can take something as small as a mouse and we can do X-rays in any vascular bed, any organ, and look at the precision, or use the precision of the angiography to look at the blood vessels in these animal models. So we were able to take an animal model, or take a mouse that had pulmonary hypertension, or a mouse that had coronary artery disease, or even peripheral artery disease. And we were able to look at how these vessels are damaged in these tiny little mice using the synchrotron facility. And the reason why this was so important is because we could then treat these diseased mice with ghrelin to see if it impacts on the integrity of these blood vessels, to see whether it improves the health of these animals and whether it reverses or treats the disease. So collectively, if I were to sum up these studies collectively, what we found was that ghrelin had this unique ability to cause the blood vessels to relax. One of the problems with a lot of the vascular diseases is they become so tight and tense that it facilitates the disease, but ghrelin was able to cause these vessels to relax. On top of that, it was able to cause the production or stimulate the production of new blood vessels in a diseased organ. Now the benefit of these two things is that it increases the blood flow to the diseased organ. And one of the key things for therapies is to increase blood flow to that diseased organ. So with this in mind, what we did was we took our animal models with peripheral artery disease, coronary artery disease, or pulmonary hypertension and treated them with ghrelin. And collectively, every time we consistently saw that ghrelin was able to improve the health and function of the blood vessels and ultimately reverse the prognosis of the disease. So this is fantastic outcomes, and we were over the moon, but it's always difficult to I guess, get financial backing to take it to clinical trials. But on top of that, we need to ask the question, well, our cardiovascular system is to some degree already protected by the ghrelin that we produce in our own bodies. So we can actually produce this hormone. So we ask the question, well, what happens if you don't produce enough of your own ghrelin? And so what we did was we were able to generate, once again, a mouse model where it had absolutely no ghrelin, and compare that with the mouse model that did have a normal level of ghrelin in it. And what we found, to our amazement, is that these two different mice were indistinguishable when we looked at their cardiovascular system. Same heart health, same vascular health, which was quite surprising. But what became apparent was when we challenged the cardiovascular system of these animals. So we would stress the cardiovascular system and then see how the animals responded. Now, when we looked at the stress of the normal animal, it challenged, but it did not disrupt this brain-heart communication. So sympathetic activity was maintained normal, which meant the heart was also preserved with its normal structure and integrity. And on top of that, when we challenged the cardiovascular system, the health of the arteries was preserved. Now, when we compared that to the animals that had absolutely no ghrelin, it was quite intriguing to find that these animals could not tolerate any stress towards their cardiovascular system. And so therefore, even the smallest amount of stress led to a breakdown in the communication between the heart and the brain. So there was this increase in sympathetic nerve activity, which facilitated or exacerbated the onset of heart disease as well as vascular disease. So these results were sort of painting the picture that ghrelin is like a life jacket or a bike helmet. When you're wearing them, you don't really notice them. They're not really doing anything, right? It's when you fall in the water or fall off your bike that they become noticeable because they protect you. Ghrelin is the same. We don't really have an idea of what it's doing under normal circumstances, but when your cardiovascular system is challenged, ghrelin is one of the ones that comes to your rescue. So what are the outcomes from all of this research? I am incredibly privileged and honoured to say that a lot of this work has been published in reputable journals. It has advanced our knowledge and our understanding of the cardiovascular system and the role of ghrelin in it. And I can see how it has the potential to impact on future clinical practice. But as someone of Pacific descent, I can't help but think that this research doesn't really address the disparity when we look at the prevalence of cardiovascular disease between different ethnicities. It is widely accepted that cardiovascular disease disproportionately affects Pacific people, with Pacific people 2 to 3 times more likely to suffer from some form of cardiovascular disease compared to New Zealand and European people. Not only that, Pacific people tend to experience the cardiovascular disease much more severely and at a much younger age. And the question is, why do we have this disparity? And to be honest, I don't know. There are a multitude of reasons, many of which need to be explored. But given my background and my experience, the question that comes to mind for me is, maybe Pacific people have a low level of ghrelin. Could this be a contributing factor? And so this is what started the journey of returning to the heart of the Pacific. I must acknowledge at this point in time the great leadership of Whamawina Professor Whaafatai Sopawanga, who has been instrumental, who has been a powerful voice of Pacific within the Division of Health Sciences, within the university as a whole, and was an important mentor for, reinstilling a pride of the Pacific within so many of the staff here at the university. And so she was one of the, instigators of asking me the question, Daryl, what about the Pacific? And this is what started the whole journey of returning to the heart. There's a famous Samoan proverb that says, ole ale, ilipuli ole tautua, which means the pathway to leadership is through service. And I think Tai epitomizes this very proverb and has encouraged many of us other Pacific staff to embrace this proverb as well. So with that in mind, within New Zealand, I had a student, Edelini, I see her up there. We decided to look at the circulating levels of ghrelin in Pacific versus non-Pacific. And what really staggered me is that Pacific people have less than half the amount of ghrelin than New Zealand and European populations. Now, earlier slides, we showed that with low levels of ghrelin, you've lost this protective factor for your cardiovascular system. So what we now need to ask is, what is the impact of this low level ghrelin in Pacific people when it comes to this brain-heart communication, in other words, the sympathetic nerve activity? How does this low ghrelin impact on the cardiovascular system as a whole in Pacific people? Maybe it is that this low level of ghrelin is the reason they are predisposed to cardiovascular disease in the first place. Another question is, in this particular study, we were just looking at New Zealand Pacific people. Could a westernized society predispose Pacific people to cardiovascular disease? Is there a difference between Pacific here in New Zealand, born and raised, versus those born and raised in the islands? And so this gave way to favourable funding from the Health Research Council to start addressing this very question. And as Lisa alluded to before, we were successful in getting funding for this project called Can Loss of a Hunger Hormone, which is ghrelin, increase cardiovascular disease in Pacific people? And so therefore, I was fortunate enough to recruit a team from around the Pacific. First of all, we have Asiata Professor Satoviali, who is a cardiologist based in the National University of Samoa. We have James Fisher based in the University of Auckland. We have Dr. Alamanda based in Christchurch, and then there's Kare. And so collectively what we're doing is trying to address the question, how is the cardiovascular health in our Pacific people respondent to ghrelin? Do they respond positively, much more than non-Pacific, which would explain why they are predisposed to cardiovascular disease? Is there a difference between Pacific people here in New Zealand and in Samoa? And to do that, we need to take this research to Samoa. And so just as it was a privilege to experience and observe the culture of Japan, so too it is to experience the serenity of Samoa. I highly recommend for any of you who haven't been to Samoa to please visit. It's a truly unique culture. The research itself will be conducted in the main city of Samoa, which is Apia, and it will be conducted at the National University of Samoa, which is just down the road from where my family live. So it will be good to, in essence, return home. We will also be able to recruit the services of the Scientific Research Office of Samoa, which we'll also be collaborating with. What are the desired outcomes of this research? As much as I think publications are fantastic for career development, what I would really prefer is to see outcome when it comes to the people. Another proverb in Samoa is "Ela ai se mea, e sili atu I la lo'u ainga." Nothing is more important than family. So what I'd love to see is that through working with ghrelin and our Pacific people, we can reduce this disparity that currently exists with the prevalence of cardiovascular disease. So tonight I've taken you through the journey, starting in Samoa, coming to New Zealand, interacting with Japan, Australia, before returning back to the heart of the Pacific. But let me share with you that this journey still continues, and it will be an ongoing journey. As I've gone through this journey, I like to, I guess, make the analogy that it's like travelling in the va'a or the waka, where we're paddling through stormy waters. But this is not a solo journey. No individual can navigate a va'a or a canoe by themselves. It takes a lot of effort. So for me, my navigator has been my Lord and Saviour, and the incredibly rich community that I have in my local church. At the beginning, I asked the question, wai a'u, who am I? And the answer to that question is, o au o se atali'i o le atua, which means, I am a child of God. Throughout this journey, it's really hard to paddle on one side. I needed a co-partner to be paddling on the other side at the same time. Jane, thank you. I don't really know, I don't have the words to express how grateful I am. Amazing support. Progress has been limited by the barnacles attached to the waka, so I need to acknowledge my children. Thank you, Zachary, Faith, and Asher. But seriously, they are a true joy in going through this journey. Ainga, or family, is so critically important. And I cannot say how privileged I am to know that every time I go to work in the Department of Physiology, I'm not going to colleagues, I'm going to family. Each and every one of you, I am truly humbled by the feeling of family when working with each of you. I'm not too sure how many workplaces can say that, but it is a privilege. It is a joy to work with all of you. Sorry, I couldn't name everyone, and I don't have photos of everyone, but just a few people that have stood out. I did want to highlight that we tried to reenact sitting in the waka in that one chair. The four of us tried to squeeze in. The fitness came about with Rebecca and I trying to do runs together. As you can see, I struggled, she didn't. And then finally, I just need to also acknowledge my cultural identity in Samoa. And I think it's been inspirational to have the support of both the Pacific Island Centre, but also Va'a o Tautai, the Centre for Pacific Health. Both the leaders in that group, those teams, and the team members themselves. As the proverb says, there is nothing more important than family. And family extends just beyond my immediate family, but to my colleagues and my Pacific Ainga. So with that, I just want to say, whaawhitai ia o te uma. Whaawhitai mo le ona sai, le nei awanoa. Malo le fe langolanga mai, malo le whilifuati. Ia manuia o fuafuanga mo le lumanai, tofa soifua. Thank you.
Oh, that's a great journey, Daryl. Oh, you can stay here. I was going to talk for 10-15 minutes, but because of time, I'll make it short. Tina koutou katoa. I'm ko Rajesh Katare Toku Ingwa. So I'm the head of department for physiology. But before that, I know Daryl as a friend, as a colleague. And every day, I guess, we discuss a lot of things, starting from personal to professional. And it's a great colleague, and it's a privilege to thank Daryl. So Daryl, congratulations on your professor, for being promoted to a professor. It's well deserved. And thank you for a talk that showcased many of your strengths, not only research, but how you are engaging with the community and the family. And I can say that your passion in cardiovascular physiology, which started, interestingly, you're trying to get the communication between brain and the heart. It's amazing. And you're keen to understand how the hormone, the ghrelin, which works and which communicates with the heart. That's amazing. I'm sure with the results you have, it shouldn't be too soon to go into the clinical trial, but I can say already you're trying to take that to the community. That's great. Thank you very much. And it's very well understood that you're always trying to get the new technologies. So again, a synchrotron radiation is one of the example which I know I've been using it, and that's a great technology you brought in. You introduced it to the department and also many New Zealanders. Thank you so much for that. And it's of no surprise, seeing all these results, you're starting to get big fundings, and I'm sure that would be continuing as it is. So you are told a lot, so I don't know. I mean, Lisa already told many about your achievements, so I don't need to repeat that. So thank you so much for being a wonderful colleague to everyone, a lot of everyone to the department. We all love your prank. I was hoping that you're going to start your professorial lecture with some sort of prank, but you didn't do that. And I am thanks to you that you did not show many photos which you took in synchrotron, which we didn't want to show outside. Thank you so much, and we are looking forward to your continued journey. So I would like to invite everyone to join again, thanking me, Daryl, for this wonderful journey, and all the best to continue the great journey. And I have a small token of appreciation for Daryl. So maybe you should come this side. Just for the video can see this. And for thanking for your service and for this great talk. Congratulations once again, and thank you.
Tēnā koutou katoa, te lofa lava, warm Pacific greetings. My name's Neil Gemmell. I'm the Acting Deputy Pro-Vice Chancellor for Health Sciences. So I have a very simple job, which is actually just to thank you all for your attendance this evening. But I want to go and then to invite you for drinks and some food. But I just want to reflect, Daryl, thank you very much on what was a wonderful and very heartfelt IPL, where you've taken us on a journey which I think has touched us all this evening. So thank you for that. I want to acknowledge you as an amazing colleague and researcher. And of course, I know you best through your contributions as our Associate Dean Pacific in the School of Biomedical Sciences. And I thank you very much for the service that you have undertaken on behalf of the school and the division of the university. So I think I'll just say thank you. I'm slightly lost for words too. I think it was a wonderful IPL, a great oration, good bit of humour there. I think Pat will probably forgive you. And so just please, again, join with me in thanking Daryl Schwenke for a wonderful IPL.